Chapter 15. I haven't gotten very far on the first draft, but I'll show you what I have, Dex says to Anthony right after Miss Cahill spills the class into their new pairs, which was right after she told them that they're going to be working with a different partner every week so that they can experience the beauty of different perspectives. Anthony doesn't mind being partnered with Dex. At least he knows him and feels comfortable around him. But he can't imagine doing much of anything today, not after the morning he just had. So, Dex says as he pulls a sheet of notebook paper from his binder, I'm writing an essay on the 1991 to 1992 Cleveland Cavaliers and their upset of the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Basically, they won because most of the team was able to stay healthy that year, so I want to make the argument that a sports team, nutrition, and medical staff is just as important as it is scouts and coaches. Anthony is barely listening. His mind is swimming, thoughts swirling. I can show you my outline since I've already finished that, Dex continues. Then I'll just read whatever you have. I ain't got nothing, Anthony says. Dex studies Anthony's face and then glances down at Anthony's notebook, the one he was writing at the beginning of class, the one he writes in every class, the one he spends hours writing in the night before. Anthony had come home from the hoop group buzzing, floating from spending another afternoon with Tamika. They never talk much at practice, especially not about anything other than basketball. But just being around her made Anthony feel different. Like maybe, hopefully, not everything in his life is terrible. With no one to talk to about his feelings, about Tamika or basketball or anything else, Anthony took to his writing, to the composition notebooks that have been his loyal companions for as long as he can remember. The words flowed like they always do, his deepest emotions and most private thoughts pouring out on the lined pages like water from a neighborhood fire hydrant that has been pried open on the hottest summer day. For hours, Anthony sat at the rickety table in their small kitchen and wrote and wrote and wrote. He was still writing when his mother joined him, poking at the roast beef in the slow cooker to see if it was tender. He was still writing when she fixed their plates of meat and vegetables, the potatoes, carrots, and celery, butter soft and covered in juice. Anthony grabbed a couple of pieces of bread, wheat bread, and piled everything else on top, folding his dinner into a sandwich that allowed him to keep writing while he ate. His mom never said a word, just chewed on her own food. In silence, her eyes fixed on the clock over the stove. As soon as she was done, she slid her plate into the sink and wheeled herself to her bedroom, locking the door closed behind her. By the time his father showed up, spent and heavy from the day, Anthony had retreated to his room as well. He'd planned to start writing again once he got there, but he took one look at his backpack filled with notebooks and syllabi and froze. All he could think about was his creative writing class and how, the next day, he'd have to share his work with someone else. Anthony knew that he wanted to write a collection of poems for his assignment, but that was as far as he'd gotten. Night after night, he'd prepare to work on his poems, but hours later the pages would still be as blank as it was when he started. It was the fear of people reading his work that got him the panic that from loving Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks and believing deep down that he could never measure up. How could Anthony compete with Hughes or Brooks or Giovanni or Sanchez? How could he hang out with someone like Derek Walcott, who published his first poem when he was just 14? Deep down, Anthony knew he couldn't. He couldn't even finish a stupid class assignment. But when the house grew quiet for his father's snoring, Anthony sat down with his notebook and decided to start writing again. The words were still raw, but they were his. No one could ever take that away from him, and for that alone, Anthony was proud. He was so proud that as he climbed into his bed that night, he actually was looking forward to the next day's creative writing class. The expectancy spilled over into the next morning, 2. Bowing Anthony as he got dressed and packed his books, as he poured a bowl of cereal and threw a Ziploc bag full of Doritos into his bag. His anticipation was only interrupted when Anthony heard his father, saw him actually, come crashing into the kitchen. His eyes were bloodshot, his temples pulsing, his body leaning just slightly off kilter. "You woke me," he growled. Anthony apologized and said he'd try to get ready for school as quietly as possible, but his pleas went unheard. The next moments were loud and violent blur, his father's fury shattering any remaining optimism. Now Anthony back in Miss Cahill's class, and while Dex is rambling on some long-retired hoop stars, Anthony is both struggling to forget and determined to not let anyone read his words. "I need to go to the bathroom," Anthony tells Dex. "I'll be back in a minute." In his rush to escape Miss Cahill's class, Anthony left his notebook on his desk, wide open and vulnerable. It was a rookie mistake, and one that he'd soon be forced to reckon with. For Dex's part, it was not like he was really meant to swoop. He was just curious. Dex isn't sure what he expects to find when he slides Anthony's notebook over to his desk and begins fingering through the most recently written pages. He certainly isn't expecting a poem, and definitely not a poem written with such grace and sincerity. A love poem at that. It's still rough. Dex can see where Anthony has written and rewritten some lines multiple times, but it's good. Really good. By the time Anthony walks back into the classroom, Dex has all but forgotten whose work he's reading. He's too taken by its power and the vivid emotion reflected on the pages. Dex looks up just in time to see Anthony coming toward him. Without thinking, Dex smiles. He's about to tell Anthony how talented he is, how much he loves writing, but before he can get a word out, Dex is pressed against the wall, scrawny legs dangling with Anthony's massive hands around his neck. 15 minutes later, after Miss Cahill's pried them apart and hustled them down the hall, Anthony and Dex are sitting side by side in Principal Kim's office. "I am really disappointed in you, Anthony," Principal Kim says, her hands clasped tightly atop of her desk. "Actually, I'm more than disappointed. I'm angry and I'm frustrated because I'm getting the sense that you're wasting my time. Is that your goal, Anthony? Are you trying to waste my time?" "No, ma'am." "Well, you're certainly disrespecting the other students and the safe learning environment my administration and I are trying to maintain for them." A few feet away, Dex is on edge, waiting for the rebuke. He's sure he is coming on his way next, but at every turn, Principal Kim continues to address Anthony. Being caught in Anthony's wrath was no fun at all, but Dex still can't help but feel bad, and somewhat guilty, about the verbal lashing Anthony's receiving. Perhaps Hoop Group wasn't the best fit for you," she says. Next, "It seems to me that you need something more structured that can better address your needs." She pulls a slip of paper from the top of her monogram notepad and starts scribbling. "I'm going to have a talk with your counselor about placing you somewhere else after school." "Excuse me," Dex cuts in, suddenly aware of the potential outcome of this meeting. "I'm sorry for interrupting, but is it okay if I say something?" Dex ignores Anthony's stares and waits for Principal Kim's approval. Once she nods, he begins. "I know that Anthony has been in trouble before, but this time, it wasn't his fault at all." "What do you mean?" Principal Kim says, narrowing her eyes. Dex takes a deep breath. "So, we were partners in creative writing, and we were supposed to be sharing what we've written so far on our class assignments. The project is kind of a big deal, like half of our grade or something, but Anthony said he didn't have a thing." Dex pauses just long enough to stare briefly, cut his eyes at Anthony, who's now staring at his hands. "The thing is," Dex continues, "Anthony is always writing. Like, always. So when he got up to go to the bathroom, I decided to take a quick look at his notebook." "Without permission?" "Right," Dex says quietly. "I didn't ask Anthony for permission." "Well, Dexter, while I do appreciate your honesty and willingness to take responsibility for the altercation, Anthony's reaction was not a suitable response to your action. Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now, as I was saying." "Excuse me," Dex says as he slowly lifts his right arm into the air. Is it okay if I say one more thing? Frustrated, Principal Kim sighs and motions her hand for Dex to continue. Listen, I know I was wrong, and I know Anthony was wrong, but you can't kick him out of the hoop group. I mean, of course you can kick him out, but I'm just saying that I don't really think you should. Really? Said Principal Kims. And why is that? Well, we really need him, for starters. Also, Anthony has the potential to be a really, really good basketball player, if that's what he wants to be, I mean. Dex steals another glance at his teammate. He's already a great writer, and I know it's not my place, but I think you should really read his stuff. Finally, Principal Kim turns her attention back to Anthony. Well, may I at least see the notebook in question? Without a word, Anthony reaches into his backpack, retrieves the notebook, and hands it to Principal Kim. As he does, Dex notices that Anthony's arm is shaking uncontrollably and that he is sweating profusely too. Only then does Dex realize that he may have made the same mistake twice. First, he read Anthony's writing without Anthony's consent. Now he's opened the door for the Principal Kim to do the same. Anthony's eyes are focused on his hands, but Dex watches as Principal Kim reads silently, as the hard frown on her lips began to soften. This is indeed good work, she says, when she looks up at Anthony again. Very, very good work. But I still don't know that it has been any bearing on what happened in Miss Cahill's class. Your behavior was unacceptable, Anthony, and this isn't the first time you've exhibited unacceptable behavior. Principal Kim waits a beat, then says, Perhaps you'd like to explain to me in your words why you should be allowed to remain in hoop group? Anthony's mind is racing fast. Too fast for logical rational thought. He wants to say that he doesn't care about hoop group, that protecting his property from nosy kids like Dex is far more important than some whack after school basketball program that doesn't even have kids to make a team. A real team. But he doesn't say that. I want to stay in hoop group because I like being on the team, he says instead. I'm not great, but I'm getting better and starting to actually like basketball. Plus, Tamika and Dex are like the only friends I have, I guess. This time, Anthony glances over at Dex. I was upset about him reading my notebook, so I overreacted. But if you give me another chance, it won't happen again. Silent tension settles over the room like an August heat wave. It is thick, smothering, and unrelenting. Finally, Principal Kims gets up from her seat and opens the door to her office, signaling the boys that it's time for them to leave. Okay, Anthony, she says sternly. I will give you one last chance with the hoop group. But when I say this is your last chance, I mean it. Once Anthony and Dex are out of earshot and eyesight of Principal Kim, Dex clears his throat to get Anthony's attention. Look, Anthony, I know I said this already, but if you said it before, you don't need to say it again, Anthony says, keeping his eyes straight ahead. Yeah, I know, but I want to. Well, I don't want you to. I just want to say that Anthony steps directly in front of Dex, forcing him to stop walking. It's over, okay? You don't have to apologize anymore. In fact, I don't want you to say anything about this ever again. Not to me or anyone else. You got that? At first, Dex is shaken, maybe even a little frightened, but then something changes. His skinny arms flex tight, and he squares up to Anthony as best as he can. You can't come at me like this, just because I wanted to apologize, Dex says. I read your notebook, and you got upset, and I feel bad about that, so I can't apologize for it, and you can't accept my apology, okay? I'm not your freaking enemy. I'm on your team, remember? Once he's finished, Dex stands, chest out, fully ready to be pounded onto the ground. But to his surprise, Anthony nods and said simply, Okay. Okay, Dex says. Anthony nods again. Okay. So, I guess we should head to practice now? Yeah, Anthony says. I guess we probably should.